A young friend of mine a few weeks ago was telling me about getting his wisdom teeth pulled and the pain that, was resulting from that. And it's kind of a big deal. It's kind of a rite of passage for many of us. Sometimes it happens in your teens, sometimes in your early 20s. It usually doesn't go on too long. Some people never get their wisdom teeth pulled if you've got enough room for them in the back. But many of us, in fact, do, and actually some people, they have to get them pulled because otherwise their mouth would be completely screwed up if that didn't happen. And that reminded me of my own rather grisly and gruesome experience with getting my wisdom teeth pulled, which I'm going to tell you about here, but I want to give a little bit of a warning ahead of time. If you're the kind of person who is, turned off or disgusted or made anxious by hearing about pain and suffering and medical matters, then this video might not be for you. If, on the other hand, you want to hear the story, I'm going to tell it right now. And the story begins with not getting my wisdom teeth pulled when they really should have been done. I was in the United States Army over in Germany, and this was, the late 80s, early 90s, and I was in a combat engineer unit, because that's what I was. I was in the 16th Engineers, and, during peacetime in that era, there was this tendency to, cut costs as much as possible. So, we were technically allowed to go on sick call if we needed. One of the benefits of being in the military is you're supposed to have at least decent and free health care. But you have to go on sick call in order to use that, right? They don't just let you walk into an office. Everything has to be approved. And I couldn't get on sick call for, most things when I was sick, and neither could most of my fellow soldiers. For example, it took me a month of, enduring 5-mile runs every morning with terrible pain in my hip and just sort of toughing it out before, seeing me limping around. Finally, one of the people in charge let me go on sick call. And then going to sick call meant that a medic looked at me and said, "Oh, you got bursitis in your hip. Here's some, icy hot. Put it on that once a night." And that's it? You're not going to check anything? Yeah, that was it. And I was only born with 3 wisdom teeth. They're the molars in the very back of your mouth. And if you only have one tooth on one side as it's coming out, there's a tendency for the tooth to just keep going and going and going. So I actually have a big enough mouth that I could probably have those wisdom teeth in the back of my jaw, but only having one on one side meant that the other one kept growing and growing and eventually started cutting into my gum. And it wasn't, terrible, but it wasn't fun either. It wasn't something that you just didn't notice. And so I eventually, got to go on sick call for it. And interestingly enough, the Army people who looked at me, they're like, "We're not going to do anything about this for the time being. We'll just keep monitoring it." And I was like, "My tooth?" And they're like, "We've decided." And so then I got out of the Army, and it was, continuing to bother me, but not, terribly. And, it started getting worse and started getting worse. By this time, I was up in college at Lakeland College and living, if I remember right, in one of the dorms. And I had a girlfriend who was local in Sheboygan, actually fiance at the time. And so I was on my mom's insurance, and I didn't use it very often. I mean, if I got like a cold or something, I didn't go to the doctor for that. I wasn't like breaking bones or anything. Although I do remember actually while I was working down here in Waukesha, I gave myself a nasty scar breaking boxes. One of them turned out to have a steel bar in it when I was working at Shakey's Pizza. Or no, Ponderosa, that's right, because they took me to the Waukesha hospital. In any case, I didn't go to the hospital very, very much. I was on my mom's insurance plan. She had an HMO, which was basically a 1980s, 1990s cost-cutting measure. You could only go to certain hospitals, certain doctors, only certain things were covered. You had to pay on top of that. It was like one of the beginning of the progressive suckiness of American healthcare, the HMO. And so we scheduled, an appointment for me to go down to the Milwaukee area and, get my wisdom teeth taken care of. And so I think there must have been an initial time with a dentist, and then we scheduled me for the actual operation. And I had a lot of friends who'd had their wisdom teeth taken out. Generally, they were put under... they were sedated. They were put under anesthetic. They had like a gas, and you'd fall asleep, and then you'd wake up, and your mouth would feel like somebody had, punched you and, carved into your jaw and stuff like that. But you didn't actually, you weren't conscious for the operation while they were digging around. So I get there, and my fiance had driven me down from college up in Sheboygan, and we're at the doctor's office, and I guess she must have stayed out in the waiting room or something. By that time, my mom had moved to Menominee Falls, because I remember the house afterwards. And so I go into the dentist's office, and I'm sitting there in the chair, and they put the bib on you and all that sort of stuff, and you're laying back. And then the must have been like the nurse or dental assistant, has got like a clipboard, and they're like, "So do you want to be put under for this?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course." And she's like, "Well, that's going to be $600 extra. Your insurance doesn't cover it." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And she's like, "It's just not covered. We'll give you a local. That's fine, but you'll be awake during the operation. Or do you want to pay $600 and then you'll just wake up and you won't feel great, but you won't have gone through the trauma of the operation itself." And I was like, "Well, I don't have $600. And this is kind of a surprise to me." And, I'm like sitting there in the chair. I think probably being a young, kind of macho guy, probably figured in. I was like, how bad could it be? Famous last words. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to take the local and that'll be fine. So they began, and the local meant shooting my gums up with, all sorts of stuff, and that was painful itself already, and I'm like, oh, well, I've had like dental operations done before, like cavities, so how bad could this possibly be? Then the dentist comes in, and he says, "All right, so for the first part of this, some of your teeth are really kind of stuck in there. We're going to have to cut." And he gets out like something almost like a scalpel. And by now I'm kind of numb, but not like numb to the pain, but not numb to sensation. And I can feel him like cutting, digging around in my jaw. And then I hear him say, "Oh, those are really in there." Not what you want to hear. What you want to hear is, wow, they're almost like falling out. And instead, he's doing all this stuff. And then finally he's like, "Okay, we're ready to extract them. How you doing?" And like, they're doing the suction thing in my mouth. And, of course, my vocal apparatus is all messed up because of the anesthetic. So then here's where it gets really kind of gross. I'm even feeling a little queasy remembering it. He has something like a pliers, except of course it's a dentist pliers, right? It's a little bit fancier. And he puts it in my mouth, and he's like, "Okay, hold on." And he clamps it down on my wisdom tooth, and he starts twisting. And I can hear the bone, the roots, the bones, whatever it is that is attaching that tooth, like crackling. And I'm not just like hearing it, I'm feeling it running through my jaw. And I'm like, "Oh, this is gross," And then he's like, "Oh, I can't get enough leverage. Your teeth are really in there." And he puts his foot on my shoulder so that he can have his hands in there and he can pull, and he can get as much leverage as possible. And then he's twisting as he's doing it. And now the cracking and the crunching of the bones and the roots and all that is way louder, way stronger. It's reverberating. It's basically, I've been turned into like a tooth socket, and that's all. That's my whole world at that point. And then bam, the tooth comes out, and he jerks back because he's, like I said, he's got his foot on my shoulder so he can use his full muscular strength to do that. Well, I'm laying back like this. That's one. We go through 2 more like that. Each one requires some bone cracking, some twisting with the pliers inside of my mouth. And then we're finally done. And they start, sucking all the blood out of my mouth because my mouth is just like filling up with blood, And they've been doing that as time has gone on throughout the entire thing. But it's kind of gross. It's not very fun. Things are actually starting now to hurt a little bit. And then he says, all right, so the last thing we got to do is sew you back up. And I'm like thinking, sew me back up? What the hell does that mean? And he looks at me and he's like, so you got these big holes in your gum now, and I've got this it's just like stitching up a wound. We're going to stitch that up inside of your mouth. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, at least we're near the end, right? And he does that, and I don't really, I can feel kind of vaguely things happening inside of my mouth, but I'm numb. So, and then it's basically wham bam, thank you, ma'am. Let's get you out of here. We're done with you. On to the next patient for the day. And he says the nurse will give you some instructions, and they've got my mouth packed with gauze. And we're in maybe like the waiting room or something like that. And my fiance comes in. And they gave us a little bit of paperwork, and then they're like, okay, he should take it easy. Here's where you can get his painkillers, the prescription, and, he should rest for the rest of the day. Somebody should keep track of him and make sure he gets enough fluids. Ice is helpful. Here's some more gauze, to pack in because he's going to keep bleeding all over the place. So see you later. And that's that, right? And that's where the story should have ended, but the story didn't quite end there. So we get home to my mom's place, and my mom is like, oh, how did it go? And my fiance and my mom are chitter-chattering. They're both big talkers. And I'm kind of out of it, but now the painkillers the anesthetic is starting to wear off. I'm starting to feel some pain. And, it's basically like having the crap beat out of you, this sort of experience that I went through. And so I remember laying down on the couch in the living room with a pillow and just dozing off. And then my mom and my fiance, they must have told me that they were going out. Nobody's watching me, right? And they went out shopping. And now these were 2 people who like to shop, and they're hanging out together. So they're going to go to Brookfield Square or wherever and shop for stuff. Meanwhile, I wake up and my mouth is full of blood, and I'm choking. I'm like, what the hell's going on? Obviously, I don't say anything. And I get up and blood just pours out of my mouth because so much of it is pooled in there. And I go to the bathroom, look in the mirror, and I'm trying to look inside my mouth, and I don't have a flashlight or anything, just the lights from the thing, to try to figure out what the hell is going on. So I try to wash my mouth out with water, and it's just blood, coming out. And so there was a card about the dentist's office, and I call them up, and at first, my mouth is filling up with blood. I've just had, these wisdom teeth cut out. I'm not very articulate. And they're like, what are you trying to say, sir? And I was like, my mouth is full of blood. I'm sure they had calls like that all the time, but it also probably was kind of confusing for them in retrospect as well. And as it turned out, the stitches on at least one of the teeth were not like, something went wrong. I don't know if the doctor or the dentist didn't do things quite up to snuff, or it was bad materials, or I was just, a one-off or something like that. In any case, like, these had come open, and they're like, sir, you're just going to have to like put ice and keep packing more gauze in there, and basically hope for the best, because you're done for today. We're not taking you back in. And I'm half still like anesthetized, and I've had this terrible thing happen to me, and I was like, oh, okay. And plus, I also kind of come from a time and a culture where the doctor said something, so you do what the doctor said. They know best, and now we know that's not a good attitude to have towards doctors or dentists or whoever else. And I like switched out the gauze a couple times because it would just get soaked with blood, and eventually it stops. And by the time that it stops, I'm kind of weak, so I've been like throwing the gauze on the floor, and I don't know. It was pretty late when my fiance and mom came back. They must have left me for hours, and I'm half asleep and like trying to sit in ways where I'm not going to like choke or cough or anything like that. And they come in, and suddenly it's like, oh wow, there's a crisis here. And I'm like, the crisis was hours ago. Where the hell were you two? Oh, shopping, And we get me cleaned up. We get some more painkillers in me. I go up to go to bed, and I think if I remember right, I think my fiance like drove back to Sheboygan or something, and I just stayed there at my mom's place for like a day or two, and then maybe she drove me back up, or my fiance came back down. It's not that long of a drive from that Sheboygan area to Milwaukee, and it took a while to recover. And then it was the fun part, right? You have popsicles and ice cream and all that sort of stuff, but. Boy, did that suck. The two things that I remember the most from it are those moments when the dentist had his foot on my shoulder and was grinding away with that pliers in my mouth until the tooth popped out, and then that moment of fear, waking up with my mouth full of something. And like getting up and blood basically like in a horror movie just like pouring down my chin onto my shirt, onto the floor, and being like, what the hell is going on? So, long story short, wisdom teeth, kind of a big deal for some people. If you get the option of being put under, definitely take it. Don't try to tough it out. And make sure that you get good follow-up after that. So if you stuck with me through this whole story, hope it didn't gross you out too much. But, I don't tell too many stories like this. I think many of us have quite a few along these lines. Like, this scar here and I got this thing here. Maybe I'll do more of these down the line about crazy things that happen. But there you have it.